Hey everybody. In this week's lesson, we're going to be talking about how living things interact with one another. In our last lesson, we talked about organisms, what they were, how they lived in the habitats. Now, we talked about the last idea was that we had populations living together with other populations, and that being called a community. So that's going to be the what we focus on this week. It's how those different species interact with one another. Our three big ideas this week are how do adaptations help an organism survive? What are competition and predation? And what are three types of symbiosis? So today we're focusing on that first one. How do adaptations help an organism survive? So it goes back to this idea that was created by this guy named Charles Darwin a long time ago. It's this idea of natural selection. Now, think about that for a second. Natural selection. Well, natural are things that exist in nature, right? And selection is a choice. So we can look at natural selection as basically being nature choosing. In this case, we're looking at characteristics, or features of different organisms that allow it to survive better. Okay, if an organism is better suited to survive in a specific environment, it's likely that those traits are going to be passed on when that organism reproduces. Likewise, if an organism is suffering because of their traits, I'll give you an example in a second, it's more likely that they're not going to reproduce. It's more likely that they're going to die and not spread those genes on. So that eventually what happens is that organism that survives spreads its traits, the more successful traits, onto others, and it leads to what we call an adaptation. So an adaptation is just a behavior. It's either like a physical behavior, sort of like the mental aspect, or a physical characteristic that allows organisms to live successfully in their environment. If the species cannot adapt, they die and eventually could become extinct. Now, as humans, the best example of an adaptation that we have is right here. It's our thumb. Our thumb it's not lined up with the rest of our fingers. If you think of a dog's paw, everything goes forward. We have something that juts out to the side. And what that allows us to do is we can reach out and we can grab stuff. Have you ever tried to just grab something with your four fingers? It doesn't work. Like, I can't write very well like this. It doesn't really work. So the idea that we have a thumb, super helpful. And that's a trait that has been passed down to us over millions of years. It's eventually been bred to the point that we have a very, very fine control of what we do thanks to our thumb. Another great example is something that you may have experienced with yourself. If you've ever touched a hot stove, you probably never want to touch a hot stove again, right? And the reason is because you learned and it changed your mental thoughts. Now, if you continue to touch really, really hot objects that can burn you, eventually you're going to get a burn that's so bad that you'll have to lose the body part. It could get infected. You could die. So an idea of a mental adaptation is you touch a hot stove once, you never want to do it again. Okay? If we look at our picture here, you see that roadrunners are more adapted to the ground. Yes, they're a bird, but they don't build their nests up high. That allows them to eat things down on the ground that others may not necessarily eat. However, it also means that other things may want to eat them on the ground too. The elf owl protects itself by building its habitat inside of the cactus, which prevents it from being eaten by other things as well. Whereas the red-tailed hawk builds its nest up so high that nothing can reach it. Now, all of these different adaptations that we have creates what we call a niche. Yes, it looks like niche, like leash, like a dog leash, but with an N. So the role of an organism in its habitat is called a niche. Okay, and that's really when we start getting into the specifics of how does organism A and organism B interact with each other. Okay, organism A may eat pine trees. or pine nuts. Organism B may eat sunflower seeds. There's no competition there, right? However, if we have a new organism come in, organism C, that eats both A and B, the roles of A and B are going to change. A and B are going to want to make sure that they're not anywhere near C, because otherwise they get eaten. So the biggest thing we need to understand, especially when we talk about niche, is organisms use adaptations to survive. And if we infect one thing, we're likely to affect many things in our ecosystem. I hope this helped. Next time we'll be talking about more connections.